on Facebook.
We'll put the links for those up on our website as well so that people can find that. That's a great resource. Is there anything else that you want to be sure that we discuss?
Yeah, well, I guess maybe one thing is I think we're all hearing from law enforcement that there is a public health response and that we're taking a public health approach to responding to the overdose crisis. And I would just encourage everyone to hold law enforcement accountable to doing that, because right now I'm seeing on the ground, it's mostly like drug war 2.0. There's a lot of incarceration going on. There's a lot of very aggressive prosecutors who are targeting like very low level drug dealers or friends who give their friends drugs, and they're not even really dealers but locking them up for decades. I mean, I just think that we're at a point now where we really can't be letting law enforcement criminalize addiction. And this is one of the things that I'm writing about a lot more nowadays, is how the so-called public health approach so far looks like a sham. Like a real public health approach we would be doing what Western Europe and what Canada did, which is institute harm reduction that at a baseline level just keeps people alive and doesn't lock them up for displaying features of their illness.
Well, I really want to thank you for coming on. I think this has been a really valuable conversation. I have learned a lot that I didn't know, and I think that for a lot of us, this is something that we hear about in the news a lot, but in sort of vague ways, and don't really get the chance to think about what sorts of things would be helpful and how could we be tackling this.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I think these kinds of conversations are extremely valuable and can really move people to talk about this more openly.
Well, and thank you for being so open about your own story. I think you're right that if we don't hear this kind of story, if we don't see the other side, people getting through it and recovering and being able to have productive, important lives, that it's not only difficult for people who are in the midst of it to see the other side, but it's also difficult for us as a society to see that these are, of course, at core, all people are worth saving. But I think it helps to see the sort of results of saving people.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I mean, I think a lot of the media has focused on the problem, and we need to start focusing on what the solutions are.
Hello, welcome back. This is Kelly, and I'm here again with Sophie. Hey, Sophie.
Hey there, Kelly.
And we have a special guest, Sarah Hargrove, who is a data analyst with the Kentucky Injury Prevention and Research Center. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, thank you for having me.
We're thrilled you could be on. So we've asked Sarah to come on in good timing. There was an article that came out last week on 538 that was discussing the opioid epidemic. And they also spoke with Sarah. And we were really interested in the kind of research that she's doing and what this tells us about what is and isn't being reported and what's going on with the opioid crisis. So, Sarah, let's start with talking a little bit about who you are, what your background is, and the agency that you work with.
I'm not originally from Kentucky, and that is now my home. I moved here because I got a job as a forensic autopsy technician, and my background is in forensic sciences. So I was a forensic autopsy technician at our local medical examiner's office for 2.5 years. And we had a piece of legislation that passed in 2012 that required coroners and medical examiners to report drug overdoses and the drugs that were found in those cases. And I was already working with the medical examiner's office on their annual reports and statistics and things like that. So I kind of picked up this piece, and that's how I got involved in the project to begin with. And then KIPRC, my current position at the Kentucky Injury Prevention and Research Center, and KIPRC is a really unique center. We are at the University of Kentucky, but we act as the bona fide agent for the Kentucky Department of Public Health. So we have the research aspect and also the aspect as public health officials. So I no longer work as a forensic autopsy technician, and I am now fully in data, the world of data, and we have been working on the past couple of years putting together a surveillance system in Kentucky that involves multiple agencies and data sources. And this data surveillance system is called the Kentucky Drug Overdose Fatality Surveillance System, and we call it DOFIS for short. And DOFIS has death certificate, toxicology reports, coroner investigation reports, autopsy reports, and also prescription drug monitoring program data. And we have found that the more data sources you have, the more accurate data that you can work off of. And the goal of our center is to have actionable data that we can use to put in place evidence-based measures to assist our community and anyone who is working on this issue. We are always looking for new ways to assist our community by using the research aspect that we have.
What are some of the other kinds of positions? So you're a data analyst. What else does the staff look like at KIPRC?
I think what's really great at KIPRC is we bring in individuals from all different aspects. I don't have a standard public health background. Since I was in forensic sciences, my background is more forensic toxicology, forensic pathology, and that I think is a strength in KIPRC in that we are always looking to have multiple personalities and experiences to make our staff really well-rounded. So we also have lawyers who have switched over to public health. We have a toxicologist. We have law enforcement. We have doctors. We also have people who are trained in biostatistics. So there are just so many different backgrounds that I feel like our center really benefits from that because we're able to think of new and creative ideas that we might not think of if we were all just public health background.
So let's talk a little bit about when you were working as a forensic autopsy technician. So, often when we're thinking about the opioid crisis, we're thinking about politicians, and then we're also thinking about police officers and doctors and the role of all of those people in dealing with the crisis. But I suspect that a lot of the work actually happens also, by coroners, by medical examiners, dealing with this crisis. I'm from Stark County, Ohio, and they recently made the national news. There were so many bodies piling up that needed to be autopsied that they're storing them in like external freezers because they can't even, get through all of the work. So there's clearly a ton of work that needs to be done there and probably a lot more funding that needs to come in too. So what actually happens? What role do coroners have? What roles do medical examiners have? What are they doing sort of on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. I think with the opioid epidemic, there are so many different facets to it that, as you said, police officers and doctors, those are the ones that are most seen and most well known, and a lot of people don't really understand the death investigation process or even like the roles of the coroner or medical examiner. And the death investigation system is state by state. Some states will have a fully operating coroner system, and others will have a fully operating medical examiner system. And then there's others, like Kentucky, that has a hybrid system that has both coroners and medical examiners. In general, though, the coroner and medical examiner play a similar role. The coroner in Kentucky is the individual who investigates the death of any individual that dies of a sudden or unexpected death. So this includes things like apparent homicides or suicides, someone without much medical history that dies unexpectedly, infant and children deaths, and accidental deaths like MVCs and drug overdoses. So in Kentucky, the coroner is the one that has the legal jurisdiction over the body, and they will perform a post-mortem investigation to determine both the identity of the decedent and also determine the cause and manner of death. In states that have a medical examiner system, the medical examiner usually will have death investigators that act like the coroners and will go onto the scene and perform these services. So the coroner at the scene will usually perform a very thorough scene investigation involving photographs, videos, witness testimony, medical history, social and mental history, and especially with drug overdoses, they will perform a pill count of all the drugs that are found on scene. And the coroner may also assist additional services, such as an autopsy, which in Kentucky is where the medical examiner system comes in. The medical examiner is there to assist the coroner when they need additional help. So when I was an autopsy tech, I would assist the medical examiners in performing that autopsy. And we also do things like toxicology testing, fingerprints if needed, genetic testing, and many other types of tests, depending on what the case requires. So with drug overdoses, the toxicology results of that testing is really important and will assist with determining the drugs that were in fact involved and also the specific drugs that contributed to the cause of death. A lot of these deaths don't get investigated by the local police agencies or the hospitals, or sometimes the decedents won't have any medical history on file. So the work that the coroner and the medical examiners do on scene and through the autopsy are really important in this drug epidemic and whatnot. And actually, I think it's also really important to note that the coroner also must determine the next of kin so that they may release the decedents to their loved ones. So the coroners are not just responsible for the postmortem examination, they're also responsible for notifying the family of their loved one's death. So they are seeing firsthand the destruction and the pain that is caused by addiction. So I think we can really learn a lot about the state of the epidemic from our death investigators.
So you said that there's a toxicology report that's done, or a toxicology panel. Are there standard drugs that are always looked for? Are there drugs that could be missed? What does that look like?
So every single state has different rules and regulations for their death investigation system. So this could vary by jurisdiction, and even in some states that have a county-based system, these drugs that are being tested for could differ just based on county of death. We're lucky here in Kentucky that we have a standard drug of abuse panel that we test for, and there are hundreds of drugs that are on our panel. So we are fortunate in that, but because of funding issues, there are many times that drugs could be missed. In Kentucky, we're actually having an issue because we're finding new and novel drugs that are being used, such as fentanyl analogs. I know in the news, a lot of people have been talking about carfentanil. It takes a lot of times for the toxicology labs to get new drugs added to their panels. So having to keep up with the ever-evolving drugs that are being used is causing a big issue for the toxicology labs, and also means that there's a chance that we are missing drugs. And these tests are very expensive. So in Kentucky, we don't test the fentanyl analogs in every single decedent. So there is always that chance that we are missing drugs that contributed to the death.
So when you look at the data about what's going on with the opioid crisis, what drugs are involved, what age groups, etc., in different parts